As you said, my specialty is in soil health and conservation, and I've done a lot of work with cover crops and things of that nature. So let's get into it. Tom showed a very similar diagram to this. He did not send me that very nice AI version, but he sent me this with those three pillars of the stool of soil health, which is the soil physical properties, soil biological properties, and soil chemical properties, all that feed into high functioning, high quality soils that output high yields or are very productive. And this is very nice, but I also like to think of these three pillars as very interconnected. So your soil chemical properties are extremely related to your physical properties in terms of good flocculation. So they talked a lot about clays and surface areas. When your clays are properly flocculated, you get good soil structure. They're sticking together really nicely. So for your physical and biological properties, fungal hyphae physically hold soil particles together in those good aggregates, and also bacterial excretions can act as a glue. And for your soil chemical and soil biological properties, everything's kind of revolving around the ideas of nutrient cycling and organic matter for buffering soils and supporting good soil structure. And so very general goals when we're thinking about soil health and conservation, either in whatever your system is, if you're working with those backfill soils or in traditional agronomic systems, we really want to support good nutrient cycling. We want nutrients to be available to our plants, but not so much in excess that we're losing them to the environment, either through leaching or losses in the air through gases. We also want them to be high functioning. We want a lot of productivity coming out of our soils and supporting the ecosystem that naturally exists there, if that's grasses and bugs and things of that nature. And one of the most important things that we talk about when we're talking about soil health is the resilience to future disturbances. If we get a really big, 2 inches of rain in an hour situation, do we have strong soil structure in place to respond to that disturbance without having really serious losses? So we have these goals, to build organic matter, protect soils, and it's important when we're making these management decisions to also manage our own expectations. I have two soils here, and the one on the right-hand side here is from a native prairie upland. So you have really, really good structure, and this is undisturbed. So we have long roots going down to the bottom. You can see a lot of those like blocky structure things, and that is a very well-drained, what some would like to consider like a proxy for soil health. I don't necessarily agree with that's realistic. But anyway, the soil on the left-hand side here is an agriculturally managed soil. So this is, you can kind of see the corn stubble on the top there, but this isn't a floodplain. So we have two totally different soils. They're managed completely different. They have different parent materials because you've got alluvium and water deposited things on the left-hand side there and upland undisturbed things on the right. So when you start implementing some of these conservation management practices, it's not going to look the same everywhere, and that's okay. It's just a matter of managing what type of changes you're going to see in what type of time frame. The key benefit, or one of the key outcomes of implementing these soil health practices is preventing erosive losses. Nothing is more heartbreaking than after you have those insane rainfall events and you just see your soil washing away out of your field or blowing out in a windstorm. That's some pretty serious losses, both for your field, but also economically in the form of the nutrients that are coming off your field. So the example I have here is cover crops and conservation tillage. The less you physically disturb the top of your soil, the better. Undisturbed soil is just more likely to stay in place. You're not physically breaking up that soil structure. But through the use of a cover crop, or other types of land coverage, you can prevent these erosive losses. Here we have two different soybeans. The soybeans on the left-hand side are in a no-till field, but you can still see that a lot of those soil particles are still pretty loose after drilling. Whereas on the right-hand side, these soybeans are a little further along, but these are coming up after a cereal rye cover crop, and that soil is just more protected by that physical mat of biomass. So should it rain, should the wind blow too hard, that soil is more protected on the right hand than we have on the left-hand side. And so the more biomass you have, the more coverage and protection you have against the erosive forces. The next step to that is protecting and trying to build up your soil structure. Again, minimizing disturbance is really the key here. The less you're physically breaking up those aggregates, the more likely they are to stay in their place and support healthy soil biology. There's also options with diversifying through cover crops or other practices. I have this very nice picture of a daikon radish. People really like to show off the brassicas, especially turnips and radishes, because they have these really strong tap roots that have the ability to break up hard pans and general compaction in the soil. But don't underestimate the power of these really fine roots either. Those are also excellent at improving soil porosity and improving the soil water dynamics there. And yeah, also the living roots are like, if you have living roots in the ground instead of just a fallow situation or an empty soil, you're physically holding on to those soil aggregates through the living roots. So something's actually there to anchor your soils. And then of course, this all kind of comes into supporting biology, microbiology, macrobiology, your crops, your livestock, the native prairie grasses you want to grow there. And so by promoting good soil structure and good chemistry through your management practices, you're also able to support micro and macrobiology. Up here, this is a really nice picture of some arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. Those are really important for cycling phosphorus in the soil. This picture here is of a fungal hyphae. Again, those are physically holding soil aggregates together. You don't want to disturb them because then they have to regrow their bodies to rebuild that structure. And maybe of livestock, the large mammal part, as we heard about a little bit yesterday, is very important for cycling nutrients in the prairie systems and also in just integrated cropping systems. But it's not just about the really tiny guys and the big guys. There's also some in-between guys we can look at here too. So thinking about pollinators, supporting healthy pollinator populations. And I don't know if you can really see that picture in the bottom very well, but that's a big stinking spider that we saw in the field one day. These beneficial predatory insects are really great for controlling things like armyworms and cutworms and those types of insect pests that we really don't want to have to deal with. So it's supporting the biology on this whole scale. So the general consensus, which again, I was asked to keep it very, very general, is to minimize disturbance as much as you can. Every time you do a tillage pass through your field, you're resetting the clock on soil health. You also really want to work on maintaining living roots in the ground. That's not as problematic for the rangeland soils, but in cropland soils, that looks different for you. So yeah, in rangeland soils, maybe you have different perennials and such, but in a cropland scenario where you are harvesting annuals, maybe you want to try some intercropping or cover crops in between your seasons, or even broadcasting cover crops into your current situation. But it's going to look different for everybody, and management is going to be very site specific depending on your goals and working with what you've got. So my mind lives in these integrated cropping systems. I'm So apologies if that's not as relevant, but so thinking about a grazing situation, if you want to graze cover crops or if you want to plant specific forages, you need to consider nitric and prussic acid concentrations that could be present in your different forage mixes. Again, if you're thinking about cropping systems, you want to select biology that's going to diversify. That's going to also help control weeds. That physical biomass cover of cover crops and other things will actually be competing with weeds and prevent them from emerging. Some of them, like cereal rye, has the allelopathic thing where their roots send chemical signals that don't allow other species to emerge. There's some different things to consider in that regard. And then also seed cost, because of course we need to think about our bottom lines and how we can make conservation practices work within our fields in a way that makes sense and isn't going to ultimately leave us broke, right? So maybe you have extra seed, maybe you have a generous neighbor with extra seed that can obviously seriously offset the cost of planting and intensifying your cropping systems. Just know that the brown bag laws apply to cover crops as well. But there's also a lot of cost share programs through NRCS and through other NGOs that are incentivizing and helping cover some of the costs of implementing these management practices. That's not to say that there's never going to be any problems. So here we've got, this is in a corn system, and on the right-hand side here, we have corn that was planted into cereal rye that was terminated like 2 weeks before planting in this specific scenario. And on the left-hand side, we have corn that was just planted into no-till, no additional cover crops. And just from looking at it, you can tell that corn is not looking as nice. The corn grown in cereal rye is not looking quite as nice as that corn grown in no-till alone. And so that could be due to cover crop nitrogen use, cover crop water use, and the data supports this. So this is a paper that we have in review right now from my PhD work, where all you really need to know is that CF at the top is the chem fallow and everything else is a cover crop treatment. So as soon as we intensified with a cover crop, or one of these is a double crop bean from Kansas, so we do that sometimes, and immediately you can see that we saw some yield drags in response to a cover crop. So maybe some of these things can be offset with cost share programs, but the benefits of these soil health management practices are not going to be seen instantly necessarily, especially in terms of of crop grain yields. I feel that cover crops are often pitched as this panacea of soil health, and they can be part of of integrated weed management. They can be a part of managing your soil for conservation and soil health purposes, but they take time and they don't work alone. It's not the only thing. All right. I don't know how many of you are into working out and bodybuilding and things, but there's a thing in the space that they refer to as newbie gains, where in your first year of working out, you can gain like a lot of muscle mass in a short amount of time. It's pretty cool. And then thinking about long-term gains, which in that scenario is to live a long and healthy life. You can kind of think about these short-term and long-term benefits also in the terms of soil health management practices. So your newbie gains, as soon as you have roots in the ground and you have soil covering and you have biomass covering your soil, you're preventing erosion. That's a pretty clear benefit of these practices. And the soil health indicator we see respond most quickly is the biological indicators. That you're not going to be able to see, but you'll be able to see less soil leaving your field during rainstorms and things like that. But in the long term, after years and years of managing your soils with conservation practices, you end up with that increased carbon storage. You get improved soil structure, which is linked to your water holding capacity, and soil aggregation, which is also linked to carbon storage and organic matter. It's all very, very interconnected. And ultimately, you have soils that are very resilient to future disturbances and functional soils for future generations. I had something I wanted to say and I forgot. All right. So, oh, yes. So building soil health doesn't happen overnight. Those beautiful prairie soils that I said some folks like to use as a proxy, those took thousands and thousands and thousands of years to become what they were. And it took us like 100 years to destroy all that structure and lose all that topsoil. So it's important that we're managing our expectations, and we know that this doesn't happen overnight. There's no miracle. But so during this transition period, the earliest indicator of improved soil health is going to be that biological activity that you really can't see unless you're getting your soil tested in a lab for microbiologics and things like that. But eventually, after several years, that time really depends on where you are and what you're starting out with. You're eventually going to see the improvements in productivity and resilience. And this is the last slide I have as far as content. So I guess I'm going to leave you with this. This is something we used to say a lot in horsemanship, is that if you take the time it takes, it'll take less time. There really is no miracle product for soil health management. It's a combination of different practices and also a lot of patience, because these things take a lot of time, and being consistent. Again, every tillage pass resets your soil health clock, so to say. It's important to celebrate small wins, even if that's seeing less of your soil come off your field. And just like anytime you're trying to make a change or do something, it's really important to have a supporting community around you with like-minded folks. Earlier this year, someone told me the phrase, "You're not supposed to do it alone." So if you are trying to implement different soil health management strategies, you're not supposed to do it alone. It is really important to come to events like this, but also commune with your peers about how this is going for you. And with that, thank you guys for your attention and for having me.